So I will be talking about students. I am April Julich-Perez with the MISTY program, and I'm sure some of you have encountered some MIT students who are going abroad with one of the affiliated global programs like MISTY or any of the others. So I'll be talking more specifically about students who either are going with you through your department or those students who are sort of erring in the wilderness and going alone, and what you need to be able to tell them so they can make the most of their stay. So first of all, I would recommend figuring out who's in charge of this trip. Decide who will be in charge of the group or the student, both before, during, and after the trip, and what his or her responsibilities will be. And then make sure that the students know who that is and how to contact him or her in case of an emergency. And I know a lot of groups, including our program managers at MISTY, create WhatsApp groups or different types of communication groups so that people can quickly get in touch in case of a problem. In some cases, MISTY staff, we have 15 program managers who deal with the 19 or so countries that we work in. They have served as a point person or a coordinator on trips organized elsewhere at MIT. So that's something that might be possible, and I encourage everyone just to get in touch with us at misty@mit.edu to see if we could help out in any way. Just curious, who in this room would actually be the trip coordinator? Who would be that point person? Okay, so for the rest of you, so listen closely, for the rest of you, everything I'm about to say, this would be something to convey to that person. So I think health and safety is priority number one, and that's probably no accident that these were the top two topics or the first two topics here at this session. It's important to ensure, Todd mentioned this, the MIT travel risk policy, that the trip is going to occur in a safe location per the policy, because it's difficult once you've started organizing something to then change plans. So it's better to know this in advance. Require students to follow the MIT guidelines, health and safety guidelines and protocols, and especially registering with the MIT Travel Registry and signing the appropriate forms. And then, so MISTY puts together twice a year now health and safety sessions for all our students going abroad over IAP and in the summer. And we invite everyone to attend. In fact, we just had one last week or so that Todd spoke at. And so at these sessions, we talk about those top, just like Dr. Heller said, let's just get across the things we want the students to retain. Things like visiting MIT Medical early, making sure that the prescriptions they need are legal in the country they're going to is very important for students to know about. The other top sort of advice, common sense, stay vigilant, as Todd was talking about. And certainly at MISTY, at least, we forbid our students from driving, or at least the undergrads, from driving abroad. So it's very good advice. And then employ campus resources if incidents do occur. So all of these things over here are triggered when a student or a trip leader calls ISOS, but just to know that there's a lot of resources here on campus working behind the scenes to help with health and safety, because not everyone in the room can be an expert in this. Details are things that can foil a trip and make it a lot less fun if the details weren't worked out in advance. So things to pay attention to well in advance of the trip are making sure students have their passport, the visa that they need, immigration status sorted out. If they're an international student, we suggest that they visit ISO to talk about, can they go, what do they need to do to come back. Finances and banking, ATMs, making sure the students know how much they're going to need for this trip, and then how will they access that cash. Will their card work at the ATM? They should call their bank and make sure, or carry cash, or whatever other option makes sense. Looking into their cell phone plan and whether they'll be able to use that abroad, and then of course registering and completing the forms. And there's a wonderful checklist available on the website of the Global Education and Career Development Office that you can hand to students and ask them to work through themselves so that they can work through this list. We at MISTY, at least, think that it's extremely important for students before they go to know a lot about the culture they're going into so that they can really make the most of the trip. So I would encourage students to learn about the place they're going as much as possible, learn some of the language, learn about the culture, history, politics, what's going on today. And there's resources available for that. Either, if it's a long-term project, they could there's a lot of courses available at MIT. They can read newspapers. There's a lot of online resources. I'll be talking in a minute about GlobeSmart and how that can help, or using language apps such as Duolingo, and there are others, can help them get what they need. So what do chameleons do? They adapt to their environment. So kind of along the same lines, communication norms vary from culture to culture. And one could do an entire hour-long session on this topic alone. But just conveying to the students that in order to really be successful and collaborate with colleagues while they're abroad and make the most of their time and immerse themselves, that understanding that communication happens differently in different cultures is very important. Just in the same way as the students, when they came to Boston, New England, or MIT, which has its own culture, as we all know, just as they had to adapt when they came here, they're going to need to adapt to a new culture with different norms in order to be successful. So students should be ready to let go of preconceived ideas about how things are supposed to work. Well, this is the way it's supposed to happen. Things aren't going to always work out the same way. It's a completely different culture and environment. So I think this one is one that's hard for especially MIT students who are used to being exceptionally good at many things to show up in a culture and then be suddenly bad at so many things that should be so much easier. I'm sure everyone's felt this way, like, why can't I simply buy a train ticket? I don't even know how to ask the questions I need to, depending on how complicated that culture's communication style is. So we advise students, and I think this is good advice for you to give to your students, to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And for me, when you're failing abroad, that's the moment when you're learning how to adapt and adjust. So it's a good thing, actually, to not know how to do this stuff and then to be able to adjust. There's resources, again, for this, for students. The ICC website that Robin mentioned has a new section that I'll get to in a minute. And of course, GlobeSmart I will also talk about. And our Misty site has pages of cultural resources for every country we're in. So anyone can go there and just explore. This is something that people don't always often think about, but we tend to, when we're organizing a trip for students, think about organizing trips for people who are just like us and not imagine the type of difficulties that someone might face, depending on their own unique situation. So for instance, a student with a disability, are they going to have the same access to public transportation that they might here? LGBTQ students, for instance, there are laws in different countries that differ greatly from the ones here, so it can even be a matter of safety. So my point here is just to encourage students to think about how best to prepare in advance for their trip, given their own unique identity. And we have a lot of campus resources where students can go and say, I'm about to go, what do I need to think about? And at Misty, we've developed a whole lot of resources and thinking around this as well, so please feel free to be in touch with us if you feel at a loss. And finally, this trip isn't going to happen in a vacuum. In order to sort of avoid students saying when they come back, oh yes, that one time when I went to Japan for a week, as opposed to thinking about it in terms of their whole learning continuum at MIT. Encourage the students to think about this as a journey. They had a life before. What skills and interests are they bringing to this experience? What would they like to get out of it? And you can ask them to think about their goals. During the trip, encourage students to find, to get out of their bubble of MIT and to find ways to take advantage of being in that specific place at that time. What can they learn and do that's uniquely accessible to them then and there? It's really good advice these days to ask them to unplug from social media in terms of not being so obsessed with what's happening back home. And to really immerse themselves in the culture. And some specific tips are, so get out of the bubble, don't just hang out with MIT people all the time if you can. Build your network of colleagues and friends locally. It's a wonderful, unique opportunity to do it. You can volunteer. One way to do that is volunteer and get involved in local organizations. And then keeping a journal or an old-fashioned blog, or even social media, but if it's about thinking about the experience and chronicling it rather than just wondering what's happening back at home. And then after the trip, I encourage trip leaders to create an opportunity for students to reflect. What did it mean to them? What did they accomplish? How did they change because of this? They can make plans to stay in touch with and continue to build a collaborative relationship with the peers that they met while they were abroad, and consider follow-up experiences that will keep them on a learning path thanks to this experience. So, programs like ours, the Global Education Office, IROP, DLab, the Public Service Center all have terrific options for students.